What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Hope you're all doing well. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about a new film coming to the horror streaming service Shudder on April 4th. And the kind folks over at Shudder sent me over an early screener. And that film is called 825 Forest Road. Written and directed by Cognetti, this film stars people like Falcone, Elizabeth Vermilyea, Kathryn Miller, and many more. And before we get too far into this video, if you guys are a fan of early reviews like this, up-to-date reviews, retrospective reviews, live streams, and the occasional vlog, then you guys are in the right place, and I'd like to ask you to consider subscribing. But as I always say, if you guys are a returning viewer, well, thanks so much for taking the time to click on my ugly mug once again. I really appreciate it. And as I've already mentioned, we're talking about 825 Forest Road, which comes to Shudder on April 4th, so a big thanks again to those kind folks for sending me over an early screener. And this comes from writer-director Cognetti, who's known in the horror world for having done the Hell House LLC films, which I believe you can also find on Shudder. Full transparency though, I've never seen those films, so this is the first film of his that I'm checking out. And before we get into my thoughts on the film, let's get into what this film is all about. 825 Forest Road focuses on a married couple known as Chuck and Maria, played by Falcone and Elizabeth Vermilyea, as they're moving into a new home with Chuck's younger sister, Isabel, played by Kathryn Miller, after an unfortunate tragedy where she was behind the wheel that ended up leading to an accident that killed their mother. Now Isabel's going off to a college town, but because of the fact that she's dealing with a lot of stuff and she's struggling with her mental health, Chuck decides to take his wife and buy a new home in a small town so that his sister can have family around while she's in college, only for them to unfortunately discover that the home they've moved into may have an evil spirit in it. There is a mannequin that the wife Maria keeps around for her fashion business that unfortunately finds itself doing some creepy things throughout the course of the film, and they start to uncover that the town has a history and that everybody is aware of this evil entity known as Helen Foster, who leads people to unalive themselves. And that is the base gist of this film. I'll start this off by saying that in a lot of ways, this is a pretty conventional, straightforward horror film with a demon in the house. We've seen this haunted house premise done so many times, to the point where it feels tired at this point, and you really got to do something to kind of spice it up. This film has an interesting approach to telling its story, though, that it focuses on different characters over the course of the film in 4 different chapters. The first one focuses on the character of Chuck, the second one focuses on the character of Isabel, the third one focuses on the wife, Maria, and then the fourth one brings it all together in a chapter called Forest Road, where the film comes to a conclusion. During Chuck's first chapter, I wasn't really crazy about it. I found it to be a little bit just generic in a lot of ways. It's really the best way I can put it. It felt like a pretty safe, generic, creepy and eerie at times horror film that was doing the general tropes that you've seen time in and time out when it comes down to these evil entities in a house in a town that's been haunted by a spirit that everybody's aware of. And it's just like stuff we've seen before. And I found that the performances in the first act weren't really gripping me. It felt like it was very much soap opera-y in a lot of ways. It felt like there was a bit of an overacting, which definitely just had me kind of like, I don't know how I feel about this movie as time is going on. But then we got into chapter 2 and chapter 3 about Isabel and Maria, and this is where I felt the film started to kind of pick up. Now, something that's interesting about these chapters is that they all start at the same place and end in fairly similar places, with each chapter focusing on a different character, but from the beginning of them moving into the house up through a lot of the incidents that they're going through, and then them going off on their own adventures where we would get new information about the spirit or the town. And so it was interesting to see the same sequences over and over again throughout the course of the film that are from a different perspective, to see that character then go off and kind of hear the other dialogue we heard earlier in the film from a different angle, or see something else from a different angle, which definitely added an interesting storytelling element to this film, and I think differentiated it enough from a lot of the other films in this genre. Now, we've seen stuff like this done before, so I won't say it's completely new, but I do think it definitely differentiated itself and gave itself some identity. I also want to praise the film when it comes down to sound design and music in the film. I think there's definitely an eerie nature to this film, that while the film is conventional and pretty straightforward and didn't necessarily scare me, there were moments in the film and certain jump scares that got me in moments just because of the eerie nature of how it was done in terms of the atmosphere and the sound design that definitely added to some of the creepy elements of this film, and that's definitely something I want to praise. Now, like I've already mentioned, the performances for me were a little bit all over the place. I feel like some of it felt a little bit overacty in a very soap opera kind of way, but I will say though that some actors in the film were pretty solid for me, especially the actresses who play the 2 main lead women in the film, which is Maria and Isabel, played by Elizabeth Vermilyea and Kathryn Miller, with Elizabeth Vermilyea, who plays Maria, being probably my favorite actor or actress in the film. And so yeah, as the film was playing out, I found myself more engaged as we got into the second and third chapter. And so moving into the fourth chapter, that's where some of the more creepy elements of the films are. That's where you get majority of the answers when it comes down to the film. But as the movie was progressing on, bro, I think they're like literally doing construction right next door as I'm in the middle of filming this video. All right, well, we're gonna move on, and if you hear that noise in the background, I'm sorry, but I'm coming to a close with this video anyway. But as the movie was progressing on, I will say that there was an element of this film that just felt safe by the time we got to the end. The conclusion came around, and I just found myself thinking, I was intrigued. It was kind of pulling me in with the second and third chapter, only for the fourth chapter to ultimately kind of fizzle out, and the ending kind of just left me with my shrugged shoulders and feeling like, this just really fell into generic horror nonsense that we've seen time and time out, and it just doesn't necessarily feel like it adds an abundance to this genre, or it doesn't even feel like a movie that you feel like you need to rush to see. With all that said, if you catch this on Shudder, I'll be very curious to hear what different people's opinions are on the film. I think if you're not really a big horror fan, maybe you haven't seen as many haunted house, demon in the house kind of movies, this film may creep you out. But if you're somebody who's watched a lot of them, especially the higher budgeted ones, then I think this film is just gonna feel like a knockoff of 5 or 6 different films that you will instantly think of while you're watching this film. I do apologize about the noise behind the scenes. It seems like there's some construction happening in the other apartment next to me. That was not happening when I first sat down to film. But what I will say is that I think 825 Forest Road is a movie that had potential. It's a film that had moments. There's cinematography that's solid in the film. There's some interesting sound design and music in the film. I do think there are certain performances in the film that elevate the material, and I do think its chapter-based storytelling definitely gave this film its own identity. But as time went on, it ultimately just felt like a movie that just kind of fizzled out. I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but it just felt like the end just left me feeling like the movie wasn't that scary, and the conclusion wasn't all that satisfying, which I think it's one of those things about sticking the landing, right? I wasn't crazy about it in that first chapter, but the second and third chapter pulled me in. I was like, okay, I'm more on board. I'm more on board with this chapter-based storytelling, only for the fourth chapter and the last 10 minutes in particular to just fizzle out in a way that left me just like, that's that. So yeah, that's going to be my thoughts on 825 Forest Road. I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say about it. Are you planning on checking this film out? Or if you already saw it and that's what brought you to this review, what did you think about the movie? Did you like the movie? Did you not like the movie? Whatever the case may be, I'll see all you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.